Have you ever really thought about, like what we're actually giving to our kids? I mean, like really passing down as they grow up, beyond just, like the usual stuff, like your genes and all that?
Yeah, yeah.
Like we've been digging into some pretty fascinating ideas about whether, maybe consciousness itself could be part of that whole inheritance thing.
It's a really intriguing question, isn't it? I mean, it makes you think about family and what gets passed down in a whole new way.
Totally. So, for you today in this deep dive we're doing, we're going to unpack this really interesting article that explores exactly that connection, like how a parent's state of mind, this thing called karma, and the kind of built-in spiritual awareness that kids might have, how they're all linked. It's like looking at child development from a spiritual angle, right? Suggesting that our energy as parents, like our own vibes, has a way bigger influence than we usually think about.
That's exactly it. The article wants us to consider that child development isn't just about biology and environment, but also about this energetic side of things.
And what we're aiming to do here, is really dig into the most insightful and maybe even a little surprising ideas from this article. Like, we want to see if there's a deeper connection between generations than just, DNA and how we raise our kids.
Okay, so the article starts off talking about children being these karmic mirrors. What
Yeah.
does that even mean, really?
Well, the basic idea is that kids, in a very real way, reflect the energy and karma of their parents. Like, it's not just about inheriting your dad's blue eyes or your mom's love of music. It's something deeper, like an energetic connection, almost as if they're tuned into the same frequency.
And it goes even further, right? The article says that some kids, it's like they come into the world already super aware, almost like they're tuned into a different channel from the get-go.
Right.
What's the reasoning behind that? So the article suggests that when parents have really worked through their own stuff, like, emotional baggage, past traumas, all that, it kind of clears the energetic path. Imagine like cleaning a radio antenna. The signal comes through much clearer. And this clearer path, they say, allows some kids to be born with more consciousness, a sharper intuition, maybe even something that looks like telepathy. It's as if they're starting out with less static in their system.
That's a great way to put it. But the article also talks about this default human state, which doesn't sound quite as enlightened and honestly kind of sounds like a lot of us. What's that all about?
Well, to connect it to the bigger picture for you, the article says that most people, they tend to run in these loops, you know, replaying old hurts, conflicts they haven't dealt with, and getting stuck in emotional reactions. And this is seen as a kind of energetic clutter, what they call karmic residue, and it clouds our awareness like a fog.
And this residue, it doesn't just disappear, does it? Like the article suggests it gets passed on. How does that even happen?
That's the key point. They say this karmic residue, it affects a child's energy field, their basic level of awareness, even how they think and feel at their core. It's like they're born into this atmosphere that's already colored by their parents' unresolved experiences.
So it's not just nature versus nurture then, right? This
Yeah.
article saying there's this whole other level of like energetic inheritance going on. What I found really interesting was how they tried to connect the spiritual stuff with science, bringing up the default mode network in the brain. Can we break down what that is, for everyone listening and how it fits into all of this?
Absolutely. The default mode network, or DMN for short, it's a network of areas in the brain that's most active when we're not focused on anything specific. Like when our minds wander, we think about ourselves, our memories, daydreaming and stuff. It's basically the brain's idle state, and it's often linked to self-centered thinking. Now, what's fascinating is that the article connects this to the karmic residue idea. They suggest that these unresolved thoughts and emotions, they might actually show up in the activity of the DMN, like the DMN becomes a hub for these repetitive, self-focused patterns.
Okay, that's really interesting. And then the article talks about studies with parents who meditate. How does that tie into the DMN and the idea of consciousness being inherited?
Yeah, so the article highlights studies that they say show differences in DMN activity and possibly other brain areas in children of parents who meditate regularly. And the implication, according to the article, is that when parents make a conscious effort to quiet their minds and process their experiences, it might actually influence the child's brain development, how they tend to think, even before environmental factors kick in. It's suggesting that consciousness could be shaped, to a certain extent, even before birth, through this energy connection.
Wow, that's a pretty big claim, right? That what we do internally can actually affect our kids' brain activity. And then they take it even further, suggesting that the brain might not just be creating consciousness, but maybe more like a receiver. That's a huge shift from how most of us think about the brain, isn't it?
It is. It challenges the traditional neuroscience view, which often says the brain generates consciousness. The article proposes this alternative idea of the brain as a receiver, kind of like a radio tuning into different frequencies of consciousness. And in this model, the idea of a parent's consciousness impacting a child's brain, even from the womb, makes more sense, as if the parent is subtly tuning the receiver.
Okay, let's dig into this karma thing a bit more because it's really at the heart of what the article's saying. How does it define karma, for everyone listening?
Well, according to the article, karma isn't this external system of rewards and punishments. Think of it more like stored energy from past experiences, not just from this life, but maybe even from past lives, if you believe in that sort of thing. It's the energetic consequence, the ripple effect of our actions, intentions, and those emotions we haven't dealt with.
And the article spends a lot of time on this idea of clearing karma. What does that involve, and how does it supposedly affect the consciousness that gets passed on to future generations?
The idea is that when people actively do things that boost self-awareness, like meditation, mindfulness, energy work, or deep introspection, they're basically working through and releasing that stored energetic residue. It's like cleaning up your mental and emotional clutter. And this clearing, the article says, lets their kids inherit a clearer channel of consciousness, less bogged down by the parents' unresolved baggage.
So it's not saying that parents who clear their karma will have, like, better children, but rather that their children might start off with different access to awareness and clarity, right?
Exactly. The article is clear that greater access to awareness doesn't automatically mean you're a more evolved or better soul. It just means they might have a different starting point, different predispositions, because of the energetic work their parents did, or even their own past life experiences, potentially.
This brings us to the examples they give of what they call extraordinary children. Some of these stories are pretty amazing. Can you give us an idea of the kinds of examples they use to back up their claims?
Sure. The article uses anecdotal evidence and examples from different cultures. Like, they talk about this young boy in India who could just recite ancient texts he'd never studied. They mention cases of kids remembering details from past lives that were later confirmed through historical records. And there are examples of nonverbal autistic children who seem to have telepathic abilities or an incredible intuitive understanding that goes beyond normal explanations.
And what's the common thread that the article finds in the backgrounds of these extraordinary children? What do their parents tend to have in common?
The thing that keeps popping up, according to the article, is that in these cases of kids with these seemingly heightened abilities, at least one parent was really into spiritual practices, like they were consistently meditating, doing yoga, or other kinds of inner work. The article uses this as evidence that the parent's dedication created an energy environment that helped the child's consciousness manifest in these unique ways.
Now, this whole idea of parental spiritual practice being linked to these extraordinary abilities in kids, I mean, it might raise some eyebrows, even some doubts. The article addresses this, especially the tough question of children born into really challenging situations like war or poverty. What's their take on that?
Yeah, they don't shy away from those difficult questions. They anticipate the objection. If this inherited consciousness thing is real, what about kids born into horrible conditions? And their response, from a spiritual perspective, is that some souls might actually choose to be born into those tough lives, specifically to speed up their spiritual growth and resolve karma faster.
So the really difficult external circumstances, even though they obviously have a huge impact, they're seen more as a setting for a different kind of spiritual evolution, not a limit on the child's core consciousness.
That's the essence of their argument. They're saying that while external factors definitely play a role, they don't ultimately define a person's core consciousness. Instead, these intense environments can be like fast-track opportunities for learning and working through karmic patterns.
And moving on to how this affects modern society, the article has some strong opinions about how we understand and deal with kids who might have this heightened awareness. What are some of the key points they make about that?
This is a really important point they raise. They argue that many kids today who are extra sensitive have a rich inner world or process information differently. They often get mislabeled with all sorts of neurodevelopmental disorders and then medicated. Instead of seeing these traits as possible signs of a more tuned in or differently wired consciousness, society tries to force them into the neurotypical box.
So the article's saying that what we call disorders now might actually be something else entirely.
They go as far as to suggest that some of these so-called disorders could be different orders of consciousness, unique ways of seeing and interacting with the world that mainstream society doesn't really understand or value. They're calling for a big change in perspective, moving away from just labeling differences as problems and instead recognizing the potential for diverse and maybe even more sensitive forms of awareness.
And this all leads to the article's big vision for the future of human development, right? And it's not what you'd expect. It's not all about technology.
Exactly. They say that the most important progress for humanity won't come mainly from genetic engineering or fancy technology, but from what they call consciousness engineering. This means a conscious, collective effort to clear out all that built-up negative karma and raise the overall level of awareness across generations.
So the spiritual practices that someone does, they're not just a personal thing with personal benefits. They have this much wider, almost generational impact.
That's the core message. The article stresses that things like meditation, breathwork, and self-inquiry, they're not just about your own well-being or your own spiritual journey. They create ripples. They have a real impact not just on your life, but also on the energy environment that your kids and future generations will inherit. It's a call to see our own spiritual work as a vital part of how human consciousness evolves as a whole.
So for everyone listening, what's the most important thing to take away from this article? Like, what should you be thinking about?
The main takeaway is just how important it is for each of us to work on our own issues, those unresolved things, and actively try to raise our own awareness. It's not just for us in this lifetime. It actually benefits the generations that come after us because they'll inherit the energetic landscape we're shaping right now.
And they end with a pretty direct call to action, don't they?
They do. They straight up encourage each of us to be the one to do the work, to take responsibility for our own spiritual growth. They say that every conscious effort we make today, no matter how small, it creates waves that travel through time. It all contributes to a future where humanity operates from a higher level of awareness and understanding.
It definitely gives you a lot to think about. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could our understanding of inheritance, like what we get from our parents, from our ancestors, be way more complex and interconnected than we realize? And if we really embrace this idea of energetic and conscious legacies, like what could that mean for us and for future generations?
That's a powerful question to consider. It really encourages us to think about the interconnectedness of life in a much deeper and more meaningful way.